Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions. Welcome to another episode of the E-commerce Edge podcast with me, your host, Jason Greenwood. Today, you're going to get a two for one. We're going to have a conversation with two gentlemen today. I'll go ahead and introduce them to you. Mr. Steve Gray, director at SG Retail. Also, Mr. Paul BRENNER, SVP Global Retail Media and Partnerships at ISM. Welcome to the podcast, gentlemen.
Hello.
Pleasure to be here.
Awesome to have you guys along for the ride today. And we've got two opposite ends of the spectrum of the time zone today. We've got Steve dialing in from London, and we have Paul dialing in from Indianapolis, Indiana. So thank you guys for making time to hang out with me today and have a conversation about all things retail media.
Cool. Yeah.
This is great. Normally I have to get up much earlier in the day to talk to Steve.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Now, before we get into individually what you guys do within the retail media landscape, maybe you guys can just tell me how you first got into this game to begin with. It's interesting because retail media has gotten a ton of extra airtime, it feels like, over the last year or two, as brands try to find new ways to acquire customers, to retain customers, to have better brand recall, have better representation in the market, etc. They have increasingly turned to retail media to achieve those outcomes. But for a long time, retail media has been around for a very long time. Maybe we'll get into, obviously, the specifics of what retail media is for a brand and what it can achieve for a brand. But tell us how you guys came to even be in this space, because at least from my experience, most people that come into digital or e-com or retail, they come in through all sorts of different vectors into this industry. So tell us how you got to be in this space.
Steve, go ahead.
Okay, so I think I've literally been in this space all of my career, and you can kind of see from the gray hair and glasses that's counting that in decades now rather than years. My first job was working for Procter & Gamble as a sales rep, and we were setting up retail media campaigns. Then we didn't call it retail media and call it trade marketing, but that's what it was. I was 10 years at Procter & Gamble. I was a general manager at PepsiCo, always working with retailers, spending big sums of money with them to build our brands with them. And then I became MD of dunnhumby, which is now famous for its work with Tesco, where we monetize the club card data. And then we built probably the world's first advanced retail media network, because we merged that with all of Tesco's ambient retail media. And again, we didn't call it retail media then, but again, that's what it was. And then SG Retail kind of builds off all of that work. So I'll pause there, but I've been in this space for, let's just say, at least 40 years.
Over to you, Paul, to give your intro.
Yeah, I think if you look back at my career, I'll give a year, 1993, began my career in really any form of advertising supported media. And that was television originally, and then radio, moved into then, of course, the digital age and web and internet, 1.0 and 2.0, eventually mobile phone, and then in-car dash. But in 2018, I joined this company with basically the thesis that in-store would become a prominent part of the retail media space, and became advocating for that. And always just in general, what I found to be a hurdle with traditional was attribution. And I just felt the in-store media space, as it became digital audio, digital screens, just that loyalty data and attribution aspect would eventually demand a lot more of the advertising dollars, which has become very true. And now I'm at the place where the retail media networks need to really embrace that a lot more. I would boil down to just have always chased how do you help an advertiser generate more revenue? And it just happened to land in the right place at the right time.
And if we go back to you for a second, Steve, as I understand it, and you guys will correct me if I'm wrong, you both play two different roles within the retail media landscape. Steve, as I understand it, SG Retail is an agency that specializes in helping brands execute on the retail media opportunity. And you guys bring not only obviously introduce retailers to retail media networks and marketplaces, but you also help them understand where they should be, how they should show up there. You also help them with the analytics side of what they do so that they can analyze the performance of their media efforts. And then you play the opposite side of the field, right, Paul? Where you've got a retail media network that the likes of Steve's customer can plug into for their actual placements across a range of retail placements. Am I understanding kind of the two roles that you guys play in the industry accurately?
Broadly, SG Retail, we're a consulting business. So we consult mostly for retailers to help them either to get started with retail media or to optimize an existing retail media network. That's really what we're doing. And we've then got a second brand, Retail Media Technology, which acts for solution partners and helps them to go to market into UK, Europe, etc. That's us. And it's with that hat on that we work with Paul, his team, to help what is we would call it a solution rather than a network. We would call the networks are typically owned by retailers and are selling and operating the retail media network on behalf of the retailers. Whereas ISM, very innovative solution, nothing like it yet in Europe, and it's set to conquer.
Yeah, my lane is primarily connecting pipes, but at the same time, so if you look at tech stack, we are combining audio and display into a common platform and measurement and targeting. But at the end of the day, we do have to guide the retail media networks to monetization. So we have step one is the tech stack, right? Step two is how do you get benefit for the advertisers and net new revenue for the retail media. And that's where I lean, like with people like Steve in the UK, I have to step over into that side of the business a bit, right? And rely on his knowledge in what's the right way to get a brand excited and what's the right way to get through that adoption with the retail media network themselves. And I think that's till we have our own main lanes, but then we do cross over a bit because they have to coexist. And I think that's the big difference that you'll find with the two of us either working the US side or the UK side. How do you make those things? How do you make the streams cross so that we catch the ghost?
And Steve, so are you working with both sides of the retail opportunity, meaning that you are not only helping retailers to set up their own retail media network in their own properties, but you're also helping brands that want to advertise across media networks to get set up and injected effectively into those media networks in terms of placements and ad opportunities. Are you helping both sides of the industry get connected effectively?
Yeah, we are. So the bulk of what we're doing has been with retailers, but we are now increasingly focused on helping brands how to win with retail media and how retail media should fit within the overall go-to-market and growth strategies alongside traditional media and alongside their category drivers. And it's a really challenging question for brands. As retail media has grown, it creates strategic complexity, organizational complexity, technology complexity, measurement complexity. So yeah, they need help.
And Paul, walk us through, I understand what media are, retail media networks, retail media systems, platforms, but for my audience who may not know, because there are still people in our industry, digital marketers, retail marketers, there are still a lot of people in our industry who don't necessarily know what the concept of retail media is and how it came to be. They don't really understand that. They've probably heard the term before, and they've probably been exposed to retail media in their shopping experiences, whether they realize it or not, or whether they know to call it retail media or not. Maybe you can just walk through the very fundamental basics of a retail media network actually is.
Yeah. And it's funny that we're talking retail media when now the world's talking about calling it commerce media to make it even more complicated because of the way it's grown. At its very core, retail media just means that the audience that you're buying is based on loyalty data. If you think of anything I've been in, TV, radio, it's based on some Nielsen rating, or, right, you have an audience that has been measured and you quantify that as to how you're going to buy it and ideally find some outcome. Retail media is saying, I have a loyalty card program. I know who my shoppers are. I'm selling product to those people in some form, either off a shelf or a digital shelf, or, right, some online or in-store activation. And I'm telling the advertiser that if you spend ad dollars, you will look at how that dollar is spent against that loyalty card and what is the outcome based on how much product they actually purchased. So that is retail media. Media is media, right? Television media, social media, whatever. What makes it retail media is the knowledge that the retail owner has about the people that are shopping in their store. And Amazon is a good example. Your grocers, US, Walmart, in the UK, the Asdas and the Morrisons and the Currys, right? They have a shopper and they have a loyalty data program, and that's what the advertiser can buy again. So that's the basic of why retail media has exploded so much, is because deprecation of cookie, privacy changes, right? When IDFA went away for Apple, the Metas and the YouTubes and all those people, that the knowledge about that audience with an Apple iPhone, zero. So when that happened, where did the money go? Went to the next place that someone could tell that advertiser, here are the shoppers. Know that because they're my advertising, I will use that same insight to show you if it helped you drive unit sales.
Yeah, and I think the other part of this that maybe is missed is that while that maybe was the incentive for retail media networks to be set up and for advertisers to want to advertise to customers in those locations, the actual mechanics of the media itself is usually video screen placements and audio ads being plumbed into supermarkets, other retail stores, retail chains, stores. We're talking department stores, mostly from what I've seen, department stores and supermarkets. That's the primary places, but almost any retailer can become part of a retail media network where they can
We're
sell.
actually in 7 verticals now, Jason. We're in sporting goods, apparel, health and beauty, grocery, right? Discount. They're DIY. I mean, the Tractor Supply, everyone that you can imagine. And I think Steve's seeing the same thing in Europe.
Yep. It helps to have branded suppliers. That's really the key thing. If you're a pure play own label retailer, then you're not going to have the suppliers with advertising budgets that a Kroger or a Walmart or an Amazon would have. And so I think that's really the key thing. It doesn't mean that's the entirety of your advertising base, because increasingly retailers are opening up to what they call non-endemic. So brands that they don't sell inside the shops, which might include travel services, could include cars. That's an increasing growth area for retail media networks. But the bulk today of the ad dollars that they're generating are coming from the branded companies that are selling, whose products they're selling.
Yeah, so we have endemic and non-endemic, but if we go back to the fundamental principle of a retail media network, the idea, and I know this is hard to almost go back to this level of basics because you guys have been in this for so damn long that it's as natural as breathing for you to talk about what this is, but at its most fundamental, most basic core, what we're talking about is a retailer that has some sort of space within their retail property, their physical retail property, where advertisements can be placed, whether that's on a screen, whether that's through that's plumbed in, where we used to have maybe music that would get plumbed into a physical space for music. We now have a combination of maybe music, and we also have a combination of spoken ad or musical ad placements that get plumbed in over the speakers in a physical retail space. So we're talking about the actual media itself. We're talking about a network that then plumbs in video ads or audio ads to the physical retail space. And it's most
I wouldn't. So I wouldn't also rule out just basic things like cardboard. So this industry has been around ever since there's been shops. If you see images of the first supermarkets, Piggly Wiggly and others that were emerging in the US in the 1950s, you're going to see adverts in them and you're going to see adverts around them. So it just wasn't called retail media then, but that's exactly what it was. And then, of course, it's evolved, and cardboard is evolving into digital screens, and audio's become a thing. And obviously e-commerce wasn't there 50 years ago, 70 years ago, but it is now. And there's been a huge innovation there. But essentially it's the same thing. It's channels or media types that are owned by the retailer that they are then selling via a team of an entity called a retail media network to advertisers who primarily are their suppliers, the Procter & Gamble's, Unilever's, Coke's, Nestle's, PepsiCo's, etc., but not always. And then the whole thing is evolving, driven to a large degree by innovation and what Amazon have done to reinvent the whole sponsored product world. And that's pulled with it billions of dollars from monies that otherwise would have gone to Facebook or Meta or Google. And then what brands are learning is that this really works. It really works. Why it's taken them so long to realize this, God knows. And so the whole thing is really now got a momentum about it, and it's set to keep growing.
So here's the irony of your point. And I think this leads into your basics question, right? Is where I come from. You mentioned Muzak. We're owned by the company that was Muzak. Right. They did audio 100 years ago in store. 100 years ago. What Steve's been around is paper cardboard and shelf labels and grocery cart or trolley signs for 50 years, right? What changed? What changed is automation and data and digital. That's what made it retail media. So the loyalty card data was always there. Coupons have been printed and converted at a 2% rate since I was a child. I can remember these things. So I think you're getting at really a heart, if you're thinking really basic, my company's been in Muzak and customer experience for 100 years. Steve's been in this business for 50 years. You got loyalty card data. I said that was a core, but the reality is it's digital.
I started as a
What's that?
I started as a child, obviously.
It's correct. You're much older than I am, Steve. I think people that can't see us would recognize very clearly. So I think that kind of digs into, I'm glad you went there. That gets into a really interesting thing, right? Because the first retail media company was Amazon, because they used their data about online shopping. And the first foray into a brick and mortar company saying they're retail media was websites. MyWebGrocer.com in the US was the first, I guess, consortium, if you will, right, of grocers that didn't have a retail media solution. They just all threw their inventory into MyWebGrocer.com with loyalty data and started the trend following Amazon. So I think that is interesting. There's no shortage of funds from advertisers that have funneled through printed signage and other forms of activation, like coupons at the printout and coupons in the mail, right? Those were always forms of retail media. They just had different names. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's another important dynamic to understand as well, which is if you go back to the inception of all of this, the monies that were spent by brands with retailers typically came out of trade budgets or commercial budgets and would be governed by typically the sales department. The monies that were spent with Meta and Google typically came from brand advertising budgets. And between them, those two big companies hoovered up 60, 70, in some markets, 80% of total ad dollars. So then when Amazon invented sponsored products, a lot of the monies came from those brand budgets. So then with brand budgets, you've got media agencies. And for a lot of people, media agency background buying sponsored products, they think that was the invention of retail media. But of course, it pre-existed that before. Now, in that world, the ad tech has always enabled programmatic buying, and that's been a big part of why it's been so successful, because it's been easy to buy, it works, the audiences are big, it's highly measurable, bingo, home run for Amazon and all the retailers following that. But in Paul's world, in the world of in-store, which Muzak's been around for 50, I can remember Asda, the previously owned by Walmart in the UK, they launched a radio station in the 1980s. So it's been around for decades, but always solved through some kind of complex managed service. What Paul's doing is allowing that piping, the same kind of piping that has existed on e-com, the sort of DSP interacting with SSP, that programmatic world, to play out on in-store, which is always being sold through teams of people talking to each other and cumbersome insert orders and things like this. That's the really exciting thing, I think, that is opening up now in the world of in-store. And in-store, by the way, is in most markets, US included, 80% of the market, by the way. Most people shop in-store. They also shop online, but that's only 20% of the market. In fact, it may be less than that in the US. It's about 20% in the UK. In-store is a ginormous opportunity.
I think you make a very good point, Steve. And I liken retail media networks as the physical version of display ads on the internet. I think it's corollary.
Yeah, I think certainly the UK, the networks, i.e. the organization, the groups of people tasked with selling and making these, there's something like 30 different media types that they're dealing with. If you count them all up, all the things you can do inside a shop, all the things you can do on a website, all of the things you can do with the audience data offsite, you're going to get to about 30 media types. It's way bigger than just sponsored products, which are clearly a big element, but there's a lot more to it than just that.
And Paul, have media networks, have they plugged themselves into the plumbing of programmatic media platforms? As those two, historically, they've been parallel paths, right? You would, as a brand, you plug yourself into a retail media network, but then you would also secretly plug yourself into a programmatic network of some variety where publishers made ad space available on their websites. Maybe it was a blog, maybe it was even a retail website that they would sell ad space, maybe the header, the footer, with the side panels, etc. And so programmatic buying became popular because it was easy to do at scale. It was easy to do within budget bands. It was easy to protect brand because you knew exactly which websites and URLs your content was going to show up on. So you could say, okay, well, I don't want to, for example, I don't want to have my ad or my brand show up on a porn website. So I'm going to blacklist those. Or maybe if I've got a sex shop selling sex toys, then maybe I want my ads to show up on a porn website. So you had a lot of control over where your placements would show up digitally once programmatic buying started to become more universal, available at scale across most major websites that were generating the largest amounts of traffic on the internet. And I feel like retail media networks tried to replicate that model and digitalize the in-store placements and make buying in-store placements of all types just as easy as buying a programmatic placement across a digital property. And have those two worlds collided or combined in any meaningful way to make it easy to cross-buy both digital media placements and physical media placements?
Yeah, this is the sea change that we anticipated back in 2018. And that I would say just in the last 12 months, this has become a better conversation. So we connected our world of in-store inventory, impression-based audio, impression-based screens directly to the DSP world. And that took some time, not just to build, but to get the retail media networks comfortable with exactly what you just said, right? Is that going to be safe? What are the impressions? How do we protect them from a real-time bidding open exchange scenario, right? How do we really focus in on private marketplace type of extension of inventory out to the buy side? That's just taking a lot of time. And I think if you look at where we started building software that was at its core, not what people were using, not just the retail media network, and getting away from selling on trade and co-op to more of its impressions. It has a CPM, right? Kind of starting with that mindset change with the retailers. and now to the buyers that are very comfortable with buying against websites or on-site or off-site as CPM or cost per click CPA, right? And how do we align that in-store inventory so that they're just as comfortable with buying that programmatically as they are the other media, right, within retail. So it started with getting the pipes connected and getting the DSPs to accept that in-store is now actually getting retail media networks comfortable with this is the way you should be selling it. And now getting brands comfortable with in-store impressions can be just as easy to buy and more valuable actually in your own setting. That's been the history that moves through.
And I guess the reality is, like you said, Steve, depending on the market, depending on the vertical, and depending on the region of the world, anywhere from 70 to 90% of all retail spend still spent in physical retail spaces. It's not spent online. So those of us that come from a digital background, a purely digital background like me, we like to wave the flag and we like to be proud of all that we've achieved over the last 25 plus years in digital and e-commerce and marketplaces like digital marketplaces and all these amazing things that we think we put a feather on our cap and we say, oh, we've done these amazing things and we built these amazing digital experiences. But for all of our braggadocio, for lack of a better term, the reality is we have relatively low penetration as total percentage of retail spend. And we just have to acknowledge that, yes, it's up and to the right, and yes, it's growing quickly. But the reality is we still have only managed to penetrate somewhere between 20 and 30% of total retail spend with digital purchase channels. And that is, frankly, we need to chill out a little bit on the digital side of the fence and say, that's great, but we have a hell of a lot of work to do to capture more of wallet share digitally than the physical retail space. And physical retail, okay, maybe at some point we're going to get to a place where it's 50-50, where it's 50% is physical retail and 50% is online. But that may not even happen in my lifetime, let alone generations to come next. So physical retail is still an intrinsic part of retail spend. And I just don't see that changing anytime soon. And I guess that was a recognition. Your two careers have been built on that recognition that the physical retail space is not going away, but how can we digitalize some of those opportunities in store for advertisers? How can we digitalize that and make that available on a global scale instead of having the old schools? I remember, Steve, you pointed out, I remember walking into my local supermarket when I was a kid and seeing the local car dealership with a sweepstakes that you could enter. It was a giant cardboard cutout with the local rep of local car dealer where you could put in and you could get a sweepstakes to win a car. And that was the media placement. And they paid the privilege of having that giant cardboard cutout in the supermarket. But now we just digitalized those opportunities and made them available.
And that now would be gamification, and you would be able to play on your app, no doubt. But yeah, you still might have some sort of theater or activation inside the shop. But no, your point is dead. The bulk of shopping is still in shops for certainly most supermarkets, most retailers. And whilst the ads have been around for a long time, it hasn't been possible for them to be bought programmatically. And really, I think that's the innovation that Paul and his team have brought to the market, and it's being pioneered in the US. But if you look into Europe, I would venture that next to zero of all in-store ad spend currently is being traded programmatically, next to zero. And the reason for that is that it technically hasn't been possible. And you need to have pipes, and the pipes need to work, obviously, and they need to connect. I'm slightly oversimplifying, but that's why we're quite excited about it, because it is very innovative, and it will therefore open up to the retail media networks the media agency brand spend that at the moment they're shut out from. And that's why this is going to be an exciting space, I think. Yeah,
I would say we've gone through this for 6 years now, and we're at a place where you can put real numbers against this. We're in this market because it's a growth business, right? US alone, $55 billion of ad revenue, Amazon taking a good piece of that. But if I used an example of one grocery retailer, and I'll make it a low number for easy math, they do $1 billion of gross revenue products, right? Best case, 2%. unit sales came from digital, right? 150 million. Yet their ratio of ad dollars being spent is on site. So now you've hit this kind of plateau that you asked brands to put more and more dollars into on-site. And to your point, it's not really growing much anymore. And you've put the majority of your money into a place that is through sponsored search or PLAs or whatever, representing only 10 to 15% of your total unit sales. Right. So how do you shift this back to this? We got in this business in the first place because so many people come to our stores, right, and buy products off of our shelves, yet the investment in ad dollars is lopsided, right? And I can give you examples that we've heard recently where brands are now saying, press my investment in search on site. It's not dropping my unit sales because my unit sales are still in store, right? Or I put $10 on site and $5 on in store because that's what I've been told, but I'm seeing maybe flat to 0.15% of ROAS, iROAS on site and 40% increase in store. My investments are lopsided. So I think what's happening is this revealing exactly what you're saying is you've got 10, 15% of your unit sales happen online. The growth of retail media has been on-site, off-site, ratcheting higher and higher. And because there's not been a digital form of media, audio and screens, we haven't been able to trigger that. They haven't been able to activate against in store. They've been stuck in this kind of legacy paper signage, takes a long time, not as easy to activate, higher cost. There's going to have to be this like reallocation exercise, if you will. Rebalancing of where those ad dollars are being put, because it's going to be really hard for retail media to answer the question, is this driving unit sales for me? You're asking for more and more ad dollars. What am I going to do about in store? You activate programmatically in store. That would be helpful, right? But then where's the proof? And I think that's what we're at this inflection moment. It was the order of operations, right? Breaking on-site, then off-site. Now we're off-site. We're a national audience extension. Should it have been on-site in-store like UK has done? In-store is much bigger, and Steve can attest to this. By order of operations of in-store going earlier in the process, a greater majority of the return for the advertiser is being shown through units per store. Steve, I think
it also speaks to the dynamic I talked about before, that the in-store spend always was and still is the preserve of the commercial teams. And we're talking huge sums of money on what was trade marketing, now shopper marketing, commercial spend, call it. The money spent by big brands with retailers on commercial spend is as big as the total advertising market. So you've got two ginormous pots of money. But the governance of these two have always been completely separate. That one has been the preserve of the sales teams to interfacing with the retailers' buyers, and the other one has been the preserve of brand teams working with media agencies. Now what's happening is that these two worlds are colliding, and that's also really interesting. From the retailer's point of view, they don't really care where the money comes from. They just want the pie to grow. The bulk of the growth will come from media agency spend. This is what Amazon have pioneered. They've shown that you can take share certainly from Meta and Google if you've got the right setup. And so the retailers are really going after that. For the media agencies, some of them are starting to look at this ginormous sum of money being spent in store and thinking to themselves, shit, how do we get a hold of some of that? Which would be a huge profit for them. Equally, many of the manufacturers, the brands, are thinking, okay, as this is getting easier to buy, as technology is simplifying things, why do I need to be paying a media agency to do this for me? Why don't I just do it myself? And then I can also
through my digital agency that I'm already working with, if they can tap the same inventory as they can for the digital inventory and they can have digital inventory in the same system, then why would I pay two separate agencies and do two separate functions?
Exactly that. So there's going to be huge changes in the way that these companies operate, and big opportunities on the one hand and threats on the other, depending on where you are within this ecosystem. So it's all to play for. Exciting.
Well, at least in Europe, Steve, and specifically in the UK, it feels like some of the legacy media ad companies, they had a monopoly on the relationships with the retailers. So therefore, I guess as an advertiser, I wouldn't historically have been able to go directly to a retailer and say, "Hey, can I put up a stand in your store?" Or, "Hey, can I put an ad on your TVs?" Or, "Can I plumb in an ad into your radio network?" Or whatever it might be. I had to historically go through an agency that already had these relationships with retailers and had a way to get the orders placed with those retailers for those placements, get the media created, get the media plumbed into their systems. It feels like almost a good old boys club of this tight, super tight relationship between retailers and retail media buyers. Like that was almost like the unholy trinity, right? The people that wanted to advertise in mission-based, they couldn't go direct. There was no direct access to these placements. They had to go through agencies.
No, I don't think not quite, and not that different from the US. The decisions around what to place and activate in store typically taken between the supplier's commercial team and the retailer's buyers.
That's only for endemic product, right? That's only for endemic advertising.
For endemic products, yeah, absolutely. Non-endemic is still very small. But your broader point is correct, which is if you are a media agency or a digital agency and you're looking to optimize your spend, it always would have been very difficult to spend that with a retailer because the tech wasn't there. Now the tech came along behind sponsored products and on site, and it's taken share and it's still growing. But it's never been there for in-store. And that's what's coming now. Yeah.
I would say there's like current state and there's ideal state. Current state is what you're describing, Jason, to some extent. Because they are brick and mortar, there is a supplier origin, right? There is a merchant supplier origin. And a retail media is in some stage of their evolution to take over that business, right? To move it from traditional trade co-op, where do I get placed on shelf? How wide is it? How many SKUs do I carry? And then retail media saying, I need to pay me more money than you paid before because I'm going to do better. And that's a lot of where things are today. And that's different for every retailer in the US and different for even in the UK. It's different. And I work in Australia as well. It's very different there. The ideal state is a brand gets an always on, which is I know how much inventory is available and what price I'm going to pay. And it's an always on. I'm going to have an always on for banner placement, always on for advertising, audio, and display. And I get to decide which budget that comes from and when I change that, right? So if I see my website's performing well, I don't need more in search. I can take that money and say which stores of 1,000 stores is overpacing in unit sales or underpacing in unit sales, or where am I losing category share? And I'm going to take that always on and I'm going to move those levers. So this is that digital agency thinking, right? I'm in control of this. That's the ideal state. That the brand says, all I care about is unit sales per store. I need to make more money. Give me
or
the
unit sales
flexibility.
per placement in a way. We're not just talking about store, but we're talking about actual placements. And I guess that's the great thing about digital analytics, all those things that we can bring. We can now overlay digital performance analytics over those physical placements. We know what's coming out of those locations and those placements that are associated with those locations. It's probably a little bit harder for non-endemic advertising. It's probably a little bit harder to have a direct line of correlation between, okay, this placement drove this much revenue, but you probably have to break it up into catchments, or you probably have to.
If it's a brand or a national that has a reach play, let's say you're Disney Cruise Lines, you're just trying to get impressions
Everywhere.
You're buying against impressions, where attribution isn't as important. Now you want conversion, but it's a different reason to buy. Progressive grocery, Progressive Insurance versus Geico. They are just straight out reach play, right? With those brand dollars. So it depends on, we see it everywhere from different non-endemics that are interested in it. You just have to have scale to play the game, right? And that's one retailer by themselves does not have the scale to go out and say, hey, Progressive, you should run more. You would need all of the grocers in the UK to be connected. So Progressive could buy against all of that audience on a reach play, right? I'm just using that as an example, but that's where the retailers are still thinking very siloed. They claim they want non-endemic, but that also means they're going to have to operate a little more consistently. Programmatic needs to be standardized. It's slow. It's getting there. But that new conversation that Steve and I are in a lot is challenging if the retail media network is not fully embracing in-store as a programmatic media. That's just the cold reality of it.
And are some of these retailers, are they one of the reasons that they're doing this? Where, I don't know, let's say it's Pret a Manger, for example, and they have these shops and they sell their sandwiches and their cookies and their coffees and all this sort of stuff. We've got these retailers that maybe historically have never done retail media placements in their stores. Like maybe they're small stores, maybe they're convenience stores, maybe they're whatever. And maybe they have never considered selling placements in their store of a TV, a single TV, or maybe they've only got one speaker in the store that's plumbing in music or whatever it might be. So they maybe have historically never thought that their placements were valuable enough and maybe they just didn't have the commercial team available to go out and sell placements in their store. But now it feels like with digitalizing the whole process and for both the seller and the buyer of those placements, now it has made it more accessible. Even smaller regional, local chains that have stores, just like it's become accessible. Everyone wants to monetize their physical.
Yeah, I think it's giving retailers more choices, really, and there's still a lot to think about. And there's some parallels with publishers, right? In the UK, you grabbed the Financial Times, you're going to have an ad experience, but it's entirely different to the one that you would get if you scroll through a local publishing news site, which is just peppered with ads, etc. And there'll be some retailers that say, look, we don't want ads in our shops, and we don't see that they're going to create value for our customers. It doesn't really add value to our proposition. The amount of ad income we might get is perhaps incidental, so it's not for us. But if you're selling branded products, it's highly likely that the income is material, number one, but also that you can create value for customers by giving information and entertainment digitally, orally, however you sensorily, and that's first and foremost the way that many retailers look at this. How is this creating value for customers? Number one, and then does it create value for me? And the really successful retail media network operators are the ones that have thought about that and executed against that more strategically than the others. They've really thought about, how does this fit within the way that I buy products and sell products from my suppliers? How about how I present them to shoppers online or in shops, how I train my staff to execute this, and so on. And there's very big variability in the way that retailers are going about this. And there are plenty of examples where let's just hire somebody, call them the retail media manager, task them with selling ads. We're not gonna integrate them into that overall strategy, on the one hand, and others, I'd put Sainsbury's in the UK right up there, where the marketing directors of these companies have how they have ad dollars, but creates a lot of value for customers.
And are you seeing a merging of the two different teams that have historically sold these types of marketing opportunities? Like we historically, let's say, I don't know, let's say I've got a massive digital presence and I've got a massive physical presence, like a Sainsbury's or an Asda or whatever it might be. And typically your digital team manages all of the programmatic placements that you make available on your site. They determine where those are. They determine how they sell the inventory. They determine which brands they want to advertise. They set the rules of the road for all the digital marketing that is allowed to be done on their digital properties, whether it's their mobile app, whether it's their website, doesn't really matter. They manage that. But then you have the commercial teams that sound like,
There's a lot of tension there. It isn't as straightforward as that. It is a little bit like a newspaper publisher where you have the tension between the editorial team who don't want ads. They want just a clean reading experience, and the ad team
yes,
who, well, that's right. That absolutely exists in retailers and the e-com merchandising team. They're thinking shopper experience, personalization. How do I make it easy and quick for the shopper to buy what they want? And they are not necessarily thinking about ads.
yeah,
And of course, the retail media team are thinking about ads, but the really effective retailers are the ones who, at a senior level, have integrated their thinking and have got the balance right between those two things. And again, you will see very big variability between retailers in how they do that.
And so, as we come down to the end of our time together, it's been a fascinating discussion. You've brought up some key points and some key market developments that I wasn't aware of, and this is an area I do not play in. So I got an absolute schooling today from both of you about how this all works and plays and integrates together. But Paul, do you see that as the next frontier for both brand teams that are operating both digital and offline spaces, and also making that inventory more universally available to digital ad buyers? Do you think that, like, if we were to project out over the next 5, 10, 15 years, do you see that brands getting religion around making their inventory available to the digital buyers, the people that have grown up buying media placed digitally, and then getting all of media to their app, all that they feel like where the entire market and industry is headed?
Yeah, I think it's shorter than that. The retail media network is, I mentioned order of operations. They really enjoyed the growth of on-site, and then they threw offsite out there as an audience extension, top of funnel, and hey, I'm a national brand all of a sudden. The brands aren't buying that. The brands are asking, how can I be more efficient with my in-store investment to drive those results? So I would say the fact that the brands, a bit of the toothpaste out of the tube here, right? That the brands now are starting to give me feedback. And I do feel like the retail media networks are feeling that pressure. I'm working with probably 40 different retail media networks now across the US and EMEA, a little bit of APAC and a couple in Australia. But the need for not just capital investment to make it digital, but addressing the organizational change you're talking about, so that when a brand says, I want the flexibility to put my money where it goes, how do they address that? I think that is in motion today. It is super active. I would just tell you, it's extremely active that the RMNs are behind the scenes trying to figure out the consolidation of shopper and trade and into retail media. How do operations manage their role in this digitization of in-store? But it's all a reaction to the brand saying, we're out of balance here. We're out of balance. We are making too much investment in a world that only represents 10 to 15% of our unit sales. And I think that's what's going to make it much shorter than 10 years. I think we will see no more than 5 years out, we will see a massive investment in screens, audio, programmatic technology, and organizational change that supports it. Because at the very core of the issue is, if you're trying to solve the problem, it's brands want to sell more product. That's the only thing that matters. And I think you're going to find a massive shift towards how to support that.
Makes complete sense. If I was doing rebalancing, I'd probably say, look, if only 10 or 15% of our revenue comes from online, maybe that's where only 10, 15% of our ad spend should go. And maybe we should reallocate the other
Basic math, James. That's the math, right?
You would think so. You would think so. But those of us that are working in the digital space, we sometimes, and I'm guilty of it just as much as the next digital pure play person.
So the comparison would be, of 100% of my investment in retail media today, only 1% goes into in-store retail.
Wow. And that's wild. That's wild to me. Gentlemen, this has been fascinating. It's been an absolute education for me, and I'm sure it will be for my audience. Now, I will drop a link to your LinkedIn profiles and to your respective websites into the show notes. But other than that, if people want to reach out to you and learn all about all things retail media focused, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn, perfect.
LinkedIn's perfect.
Love it. Love it. Now, this is where I get to flip the script. This is where I get to the point where I get to turn the microphone over to you guys, let you ask me one question, any question you like. It can be personal or professional. So why don't we start off with Steve Gray from SG Retail? What is your question for me? And then we'll hand the microphone over.
Okay, so which retail media network do you admire ahead of the others?
And look, I am so clueless about this. That is a great question. I don't have a preference because I don't work in that space. So I don't even know all the retail media networks available out there for brands to access. And particularly because now I work almost exclusively in the B2B world, a little bit of D2C if they want to establish a wholesale channel, strategic wholesale channel, or a B2B that wants to establish a D2C channel, a little bit of work in the crossover field there. But because I focus so heavily on B2B, I'm not a retail media expert and I don't work in the digital marketing space. I'm a tech and ops focused consultant. So I'm helping them with solution architecture, enterprise architecture, helping them with data design and all that sort of stuff. And so I don't work in the space. So truly, this has genuinely been an absolute education for me. And I wouldn't even know even if I worked in the digital marketing space, I wouldn't know how brands could go out and identify all the retail media networks available to them. I wouldn't even know where to start, to be perfectly honest. That's the truthful answer. And that's why brands need somebody like you, Steve, to help them. That's why they need an expert, because they don't know where to start. And I think most, especially smaller brands, they don't know where to start, especially for non-endemic advertising placements. They don't know where to begin.
All right, I'm gonna come different angle. We can't get through this without AI. We have our own investments in AI, ML for operational efficiencies. I was at Cannes with Steve. We were there together in France. I posed this question to a lot of people. If and when does AI actually generate net new revenue for brands? Not operational efficiencies. And not, if and when does AI create net new revenue as a solution?
Look, I think it is in some quarters. I think if we look at what Meta has recently said about their platform, they see a world within the next 5 years where you dump money into their platform and they manage everything for you. They manage the creative, the creation of the creative, they manage the placements, they manage the ad sets, they manage geolocation, they manage everything. They allocate the spend. Basically, you just dump money in and you hopefully pull more money out than you dumped in. That's where their vision is, and they think AI is going to help them get to that vision of nirvana. Now, that's pie in the sky stuff as far as I'm concerned. It's probably going to take them a lot longer than the next 2 to 5 years to get there, but that's their vision. And I think that for you, Paul, particularly when we start thinking about the programmatic side of the industry and plugging into the programmatic side of the industry, I think there's plenty of brands that would happily turn all their placement buying and their spend allocation and all that. I think they'd happily turn that over to the machine. If they could get better performance out of their spend by turning it over to the machine versus having the teams of people that are doing it today that are managing their paid performance, programmatic, etc., and their agencies that they're working with, if they could just dump money in and it gets allocated to the best placements based on AI-based analytics, that you have basically you have the equivalent of the smartest ad buyer and placement buyer in the world in the machine, then I think that's where we start to, instead of leaving it up to humans who have the better persuasive ability within the business to justify them getting a bigger piece of the budget, and that's been who tells the best story inside the business usually gets the budget. If we can remove some of that subjective element to the buying of the placements, and we can say, no, we have all the data. So we don't need a human being to be involved in where these spend allocations go. The machine can tell us where the best allocation to spend and adjust in near real time on the fly at times of day. All sorts of factors can go into this. And I think and especially if you plug supply chain data into that AI so that I know where I've physically got the damn goods, where I'm not out of stock, where the demand is rising and falling. And when we can connect the supply chain data to the ad data, wow, we now have almost perfect data to be able to turn those decisions over to the machine in terms of where budget is spent. And that's where I think we're going to start to see real value out of. And it's just like there's a lot of ERPs today and a lot of CDPs today, et cetera, that have demand planning modules built in, but they have imperfect data, right? They really only have supplier performance data and maybe individual sales location data. And that's kind of all they have to go on, right? So they don't have any input from the ad side of the business. And so therefore they can't see the impact on ad and marketing spend on the demand. They can't connect the dots. And so it's really difficult. And I think ad networks are uniquely positioned to be able to have access to all the data needed to be able to allocate spend appropriately.
There you go.
Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait to speak to you again soon. If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.